One thing I've always detested about human nature is the blame game. It seems to be that whenever there's a situation that involves some form of negativity, people are always very quick to jump on the blame game. And you'll hear lots and lots of reasons why insert negative thing happened. And most of the time, this list of things is just complete nonsense. I mean, not in every case, of course. For example, if a plane crashes and they have a look at the black box and they find out that it was an engine failure or whatever, then that pretty much explains that then. We've got something to blame. A factual and definitive blame. Similarly, if somebody died of leukemia and it was identified that they had leukemia, then it's pretty obvious that they died of leukemia and it's leukemia to blame. No arguments there. But the problem often occurs when people start adding on lots of agenda issues onto the blame. Oh, the plane crashed because insert airline has always been shit. The aeroplane crashed because insert airline has very poor safety standards. The aeroplane crashed because insert airline doesn't pay their staff enough wages, therefore they're not motivated enough to do XYZ, which could have helped prevent XYZ from happening at some point in the future. The plane crashed because insert airline was buying their parts from XYZ company instead of ABC company. And as you can imagine, that last one was probably being promoted by the ABC company. And it's when you get all these agendas dogpiling on a negative event that they can contribute to creating a massive negative for society. There's a whole raft of things that get regularly blamed for negative stuff happening in society that are like eternal. People have been using them as a shortcut to blame probably since the beginning of mankind, and they're always kind of shielded in a morality. They all come from a supposed position of higher morality or the high ground. You'd be hard pressed to find any point in history where sexual activity wasn't a hotly discussed topic because at some point somebody's blamed something on something relating to sex. And you can see lots of very extreme ways that different societies have reacted to this that can't really have any long-term benefit for humanity as a whole, but probably just papered over a societal argument crack at the day when whatever incident it is happened that resulted in somebody blaming sex as a means to avoid probably what was the real problem, which was probably them. And so you have societies where the ladies have to dress completely entirely covering their entire body apart from their eyes. And there's probably some that even cover their eyes with a veil, you know, they can't have any little bit showing. And of course the reason is this, is that, you know, you don't want the men getting too excited because they've seen a female. And apparently seeing a female and having excited males is bad. Somehow somebody thinks, for some reason, that the progress of humanity will be greatly enhanced if all the women go around pretending to be a bunch of clothes on a walking stick. And the thing is, there's not really much evidence created to find out whether doing such an activity does actually have any kind of long-term positive effect in solving what it is it's there supposedly to solve. I mean, I assume it's there to prevent other men getting jealous of one's wife and then desiring to have sex with one's wife. However, most blokes that I've met that are aggressively sexual, they wouldn't really care whether they've got clothing on or not, really. If there's a female in the close vicinity, they're interested, you know what I mean? If somebody else has a wife and they don't, they're jealous whether they're covered in clothes or not. And you can go down lots of different avenues that are all in this similar kind of vein, like the long histories of arranged marriages. Should we force people into marriages, or should we just let them do what they like? And the extreme is always forcing people into marriages. Does that work? Does it have a definite benefit to the society in the long term? Do the societies that have arranged marriages, are they evidentially better, more enjoyable, more successful than societies that don't? And because by raising this issues you then incite people to then provide examples of why their society is so brilliant, but at the same time they're just going to be speaking from an agenda point of view. They won't be looking at it objectively. You know, they won't be looking at clinical data they'll just be saying, well, it works for me, and all that kind. And then they'll be slagging off the other society that is a bit more liberal in whatever regard that they're taking issue with, and they'll say, oh yeah, but they have lots more murders over there, and they have lots more poor people over there, we don't have all that, they have a problem with pregnancies, there's not enough people getting pregnant over there, we don't have that problem. Yeah, I mean, these are all pros and cons, everything has pros and cons. But generally speaking, is your society happier, more efficient, blah 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 blah? Or is it just as equally as chaotic, just with another stupid rule that people can use as their get out clause whenever an actual issue comes up, their excuse to batter people? And I've got to be careful here, because people are going to then start blaming things like racism and religionism and all the other isms on whatever things I'm choosing to point out here. So it's very difficult for me in a short video to point out all the different things that all societies in the world find to blame things about sex and radically alter their society as a means to prop up the blame game on this particular sexual issue. I suppose in America at the moment their big sexual issue is the whole underage sex. Over there they're absolutely rabidly anti people having sex with anyone underneath a certain specified age. That certain specified age, of course, is just a line in the sand. It bears no great philosophical or medical fact other than there's some minor medical data to suggest that people's brains aren't fully formed before XYZ date in their life, even if their bodies are formed well before that. And I suppose that's the crutch of this particular morality, but of course that doesn't really explain whether having sex actually damages that brain development or whatever. I'm sure they could perform lots of studies, but they're going to be very biased studies, because at the moment you're not allowed to say if you've had sex with a minor, because that's a criminal act, and by doing so you'd be arrested. You won't be put into a survey to find out the circumstances of it. Likewise, if you were a minor who had sex with an adult, you're not going to be brought in for a survey to ask whether you thought it was a jolly good time or whether you absolutely hated it and it damaged you for life. I'm sure that both these possibilities are possibilities. But yeah, it's just the what they're doing in America to instruct all of their laws, and if anything needs blaming on anything, it's going to be the old underages. And you know, if anybody feels under pressure, then they can always just start bleating about paedophiles, and then everybody rallies round them again and everybody's happy again, you know. But it is just their get-out blame game. All these other issues in the world that they don't particularly want to deal with because it's not part of their agenda, yeah, just keep rabbiting on about pedos. That's nice and easy, isn't it? But has the American society improved after 20 or 30 years of bashing on pedos? Do people in America grow up happier? Are people generally happier? You don't really notice it, do you? Do people grow up with less mental conditions? I don't know. All that kind of thing seems to be on the increase. I don't know. And then of course you have the Me Too movement, where it's all a bit confusing really, but essentially if a lady says that she's had a negative experience, then the bloke should be stoned and locked up in prison and put on a register for 500 years because the lady's had a negative experience. And I'm sure there's all kinds of negative sexual experiences that somebody could have, but this whole Me Too movement, it sort of has very broad strokes, isn't it? It's kind of everything. If you look at somebody a bit wrong, then that could be interpreted as a sexual signal, or, you know, if you bump into them at the wrong time for whatever reason, that could be deemed as a sexual assault. And, you know, right from that very small minor stuff all the way up to the most hideous thing you can imagine that I'm not even going to mention because I'm going to put hideous things into people's imaginations. But it's all, you know, it's all treated with the same brush, the same broad brush stroke. You're just as evil whatever you're doing. If you've given a lady a negative experience, you're the scum of the earth, you know. And again, is there any clinical data to actually prove whether our society is improving as a result of this? I don't know. I get the feeling that chronic rapists are going to be chronic rapists, whatever the rules are, because it's already very against the law to be a chronic rapist, and adding more rules and broadening the definition of what's nasty to females is not really going to change that, I shouldn't imagine. But then every time there's a hideous rapist on the loose, or they get caught, then everybody's running on the blame game again, and it sort of reinforces this whole Me Too thing, even though the main thing about Me Too that restructures society isn't really about the chronic rapists. It's all the minor stuff, isn't it, in that people don't really know how to behave when they're with each other anymore, or in each other's company, as it were. Too many eggshells. But yeah, it's just the new blame game thing for people, and this one's particularly relevant in England, I suppose, or Great Britain. And if you want to get rid of a male from an organisation, you just have to have a lady say he said something a bit weird to me. I felt a bit disturbed. Into the office he goes, dressing down, and then maybe getting the sack, or being asked to resign, or being humiliated so much that they feel like they ought to resign because it's like so embarrassing for them. But again, I mean, is any of this statistically proven to be improving society? Does society seem to be getting better as a result overall? And it's like in some cultures, of course, they have very strict adultery rules. And if you're married, then if you sleep with somebody else, then that's the blame game for everything that's going to be wrong about the marriage. And that's going to be your grounds for divorce. Without the infidelity, you're not allowed to get divorced. But as soon as somebody's in a bit of infidelity, then you can enact the blame game of, well, that's it, mate, I can now get rid of you, thank you very much. Which in a modern world where people tend to live to about 100 years old, that's quite a stretch really, isn't it? I mean, there's loyalty and then there's extreme loyalty really, It's like if you're a young person or whatever, let's say example 21, I think that covers most bases, you get married and you think, if I live to 100, that's 80 years of marriage, 80 years of loyalty. Yeah, I mean, some people are quite happy with that. But expecting all human beings on the planet to go 80 years just with only sleeping with one partner, that might be the first partner they ever slept with, the one they got married with. I don't know. Does that really benefit society? Is there clinical studies about this? Has it been proven that societies that operate like that tend to have happier societies? I don't know, I can't help but imagine that it puts a lot of stress on people really, and adds a lot of unnecessary secrecy and guilt and all these other layers of negativity that will be building up in people's lives over 80 years. But anyway, you get my point. You can take any sort of extreme societal adaptation based on the blaming of sex for something or other and extrapolate the same question. Is it actually working? Does it work? Do we really think that society would be better if everybody was just fully clothed and completely invisible beyond clothes to everybody else, and they stuck with the same partner for 80 years, never had sex with anybody else, and only had sex first of all with their first partner, and that they did so at a certain age and never before that certain age, and throughout their life never had any kind of meaningful flirtatious interaction or intended flirtatious activity with another individual? Have we reached utopia? Is that heaven? Would that be a perfect society? Would that cure everybody's ills? I only bring up sex as my first primary example because, it's the most historically consistent blame game topic that covers all your bases. Pretty much anything that happens in the world, you can relate some sort of sexual angle to it as to why it might have occurred. But we see it all the time with lots of different things. You see it with drugs, the word drugs, and it's just blame everything on drugs. And I don't know, I could list out all the different ways societies have fucked themselves up and by being mean to certain types of drugs, and without ever actually proving whether their societies are better as a result of doing so. And of course there's gambling. Gambling's always a big negative. I mean, the negatives that can come from gambling are very real, but the negatives that can come from anything are very, very real. But generally speaking, people have always gambled, and gambling's a thing. And of course a new one, computer games, they're trying to blame computer games for everything. anything violent or sexual that happens in society, they're rifling through the person's hard drive to find out which computer games they played. And unfortunately all they had was Minesweeper, and then they're stumped because they've just been writing lots of articles how it was probably computer games that have addled their brain, and when the facts come out it's just Minecraft. Oh, no, we never said that. No, we actually thought it was because he had a crap sex life. No, we never mentioned computer games, honest gov. And then another new one, of course, social media. Just blame everything on social media. I don't know, some kids got violent in class one day. Oh, social media, look at that, he was on Facebook. There we go, that's something to blame, isn't it? It must be the Facebook that's ruined him. Never mind the fact that there's 2 million other kids that didn't get violent in this classroom that day who used Facebook. Well, you know, that kid used Facebook and he got violent. It must be Facebook. But of course, it's all just agenda-based. You know, whoever wants to blame Facebook obviously wants to challenge Facebook. They obviously feel that Facebook's a challenge to them for whatever reason. Maybe they don't pay enough tax. Maybe they don't employ their people properly, or, you know, maybe somebody just thinks they're too big for their boots, or maybe just somebody went to school with Zuckerberg and doesn't like him very much. But yeah, no, as a result now, for whatever reason, there'll always be 20 or 30 people, and I'm going to call them trolls, because that's what they are, even if they come from the Times newspaper or a comment on an internet site. It's just every time somebody says, oh, it's probably social media that's to blame, it's just trolling. It's just agenda-based trolling, isn't it? But we just got to be very careful that we don't then restructure our entire society in a negative way as a result. Has it been clinically proven that social media is bad? In a properly clinical sense, not just in a vague, here's some minor data about a survey we did on 3 people last September kind of way. If the blame game wins and then social media gets banned, is somebody going to do a clinical study in 20 years' time to find out if society has actually improved clinically, as opposed to previously when it was allowed? No, because of course by that point it'll be, oh no, what are you talking about? It wasn't nothing to do with social media, that's not the issue at the moment, it's sex. People, you know, we've got issues with sex now. So we haven't got time to do a study on social media impacts. That's yesterday's news. One particular example I would say that I have a lot of interest in is this whole depletion of the rainforest and what's to blame for it. Well, we know what's to blame for it is people cutting down the trees. But of course, when the blame game steps in, it's going to be it's because they're cutting down trees because it's cows. Because they have an agenda, they want to reduce the amount of cows in the world. You know, and they'll tell you to eat less cow meat because it's depleting the rainforest. But of course, it's not just the cows, it's anything that needs a field, and that can be vegetables, and at the moment it's soy, of course. And, you know, pretty much any form of farming. And of course it was all these people that were going on about cows and meat deploying the rainforest who are consuming all the fucking soy, isn't it? Do we see them now campaigning to prevent people from eating soy? Do you bollocks? It's pretty fucking simple what the blame is for the depletion of the rainforest. It's the chopping down of the trees. If you banned the chopping down of the trees, it wouldn't deplete, would it? You don't really need to blame anything else. So yeah, I don't really want our society to go headlong down into a road of no cow meat to save the rainforest, or the ozone, or whatever it is. I don't want the blame game to restructure my society in that particular way. And so to conclude, I'll conclude with a nice little irony, in that I believe, personally, that the main thing to blame for most of the ills of our societies, and the thing that most prevents us from getting into a more perfect utopia, is the blame game. Yep, I'm blaming the blame game.